When many of us picture ancient Israel, a common image probably comes to mind. It's this picture of a unified nation, all devout monotheists worshiping Yahweh alone in some magnificent temple. It's a comforting picture, almost, well, idyllic.
Hmm.
But what if I told you that the archaeological record, maybe combined with a deeper look at their own foundational texts, paints a profoundly different picture, and frankly, a far more revolutionary one?
Yeah.
Today, we're going on a deep dive into one of the most foundational texts, really, in the Western world, Genesis chapter 1.
Hmm.
And we're going to try and see it not just as, a creation story, but as an audacious, subversive act of resistance.
That's precisely it. Yeah, this deep dive, it's going to uncover Genesis 1 as, well, nothing less than a theological manifesto, you could call it. It's a declaration of truth, really, born from profound crisis, from oppression.
A manifesto, I like that.
Yeah, it is. It's a powerful piece of resistance literature, crafted specifically to empower a people who are facing existential threats. So our mission here is to really understand how this ancient text challenged the very foundations of imperial power structures. And not just philosophically, right?
Right.
But in a way that offered radical dignity, real hope to an oppressed people. We'll be sort of connecting the dots between ancient cosmology, massive religious upheaval, and this deeply subversive message of justice and human worth that honestly resonates even today.
Okay, then, let's tackle that widely held misconception head on, this idea about ancient Israel's religious landscape. Most people assume, immediate, unwavering monotheism, but what does the tangible evidence, the stuff we can dig up, actually show about their religious reality, say, during much of their early history? Was it really just Yahweh from day one?
Right. Well, the archaeological evidence, it paints a much more complex and, frankly, far more fascinating picture than that kind of singular image we often have. For instance, if you were to walk through the remains of ancient Israelite homes, maybe sites dating from, say, the Iron Age, that's roughly 1200 down to 586 BCE, what you'd often find isn't just evidence pointing solely to Yahweh worship. You'd frequently unearth these little figurines, various gods and goddesses, sometimes in household shrines, just kind of nestled right among everyday pottery.
Wow, so not hidden away.
No, not at all. They seem to be part of daily religious life, which suggests, a pretty widespread practice of household polytheism, or at the very least, what scholars call henotheism. That's where, Yahweh might be supreme, but he's definitely not the only deity being acknowledged or, appealed to.
So this wasn't just a few outliers. We're talking about something broader, maybe even accepted practice for a long time. And aren't there specific inscriptions, actual writings that push this even further?
Absolutely. We have some really explicit religious inscriptions that offer, well, direct evidence. You should consider the findings from this remote site, Kuntalet Ajrud. It dates to around the 8th century BCE.
Kuntalet Ajrud,
Yeah. These inscriptions, they include blessings that explicitly mention Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, or Yahweh of Paman and his Asherah.
His Asherah, so a consort.
Exactly. It strongly indicates that, for a significant chunk of ancient Israelite society, even their main god, Yahweh, was believed to have a divine partner, Asherah. She was a well-known Canaanite goddess, usually associated with fertility, motherhood, that sort of thing.
And this wasn't just some isolated find.
No, definitely not an isolated anomaly. Archaeological digs have also uncovered numerous Asherah poles, these symbolic wooden poles, and other images associated with her. And they're common not only in homes, but sometimes even within temple complexes themselves, occasionally right alongside altars dedicated to Yahweh.
Right.
And critically, even if you look inside the Hebrew Bible itself, the prophetic books, think Jeremiah, Hosea, Ezekiel, they are absolutely filled, page after page, with passionate condemnations. You have prophets railing against the widespread worship of Baal, Asherah, and what's called the host of heaven, which refers to, stars, planets, astral deities.
Right, the sun, moon, and stars as gods.
Precisely. The very fact that these prophets had to fight so incredibly hard against these practices suggests that this widespread worship wasn't some minor aberration. It was, for a very long time, the dominant reality they were pushing back against.
Okay, so if it wasn't this pristine monotheism right from the start, how should we understand this religious reality? Was it seen as a deviation back then, or was it just, what was common for that time and place?
It was far more aligned with typical ancient Near Eastern religious practice. Yeah, this wasn't some deviation from an original pure monotheistic faith that Israel somehow, lost along the way.
That's a common narrative, though.
It is, but the evidence suggests something else. What we see archaeologically and even textually when read critically reflects a religious environment where gods often had specialties, right? So Baal might be invoked for storms and making the crops grow, Asherah for help with childbirth or maybe wisdom, and Yahweh in these earlier centuries might have been primarily associated with, say, warfare, the national covenant, delivering his people in battle.
Right.
The really revolutionary idea, the one that took time to develop, was the concept of one God, a single solitary deity handling everything: fertility, war, wisdom, creation itself, cosmic order, justice, all of it. That was truly groundbreaking for that time. It was a radical theological synthesis, not, the default setting they always had from the beginning.
So the push toward exclusive Yahweh worship, what we call monotheism, was really more of a gradual journey, not like flipping a switch.
Precisely. The trajectory toward exclusive Yahweh worship, monotheism, it was a gradual development. It took centuries. It didn't just emerge fully formed at the dawn of Israel's history. Rather, it seems to have only reached its full, powerful, articulated expression during and significantly after a profound national catastrophe, the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE.
The exile, right.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how this immense crisis, this moment of ultimate despair, of deep theological questioning, provided the very soil, the very conditions for the creation story we know as Genesis 1 to take root and bloom as this powerful, defiant theological statement.
So it wasn't just abstract religious thought evolving in a vacuum. It was born out of crisis.
Absolutely. It was born out of a desperate need to make sense of unimaginable suffering, to maintain their identity as a people, and, crucially, to reassert the sovereignty and goodness of their God in the face of overwhelming external pressure and, let's face it, very effective imperial propaganda from Babylon.
Okay, here's where the stakes get really high then. And the historical context becomes absolutely critical. In 586 BCE, everything for the kingdom of Judah just changed forever.
Cataclysm.
King Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian armies, they laid waste to Jerusalem, utter destruction to the city. They burned Solomon's magnificent temple right to the ground, the very place where God was believed to dwell on earth.
The symbolic heart.
Exactly. And then they marched Israel's elite, the thinkers, the priests, the royalty, the skilled artisans, into forced exile in Babylon. Now, for a people whose faith was so deeply tied to their temple, to their holy city, to the very land promised to them, this wasn't just a military defeat. This was a profound existential theological crisis. It shattered their entire worldview.
Yeah, just try to imagine, if you can, being an exiled Israelite. You survive that catastrophe, maybe barely, and you arrive in Babylon for the first time. The sheer scale, the splendor of the city, it would have been completely overwhelming. It would dwarf anything you'd ever known back in Judah.
Can't even picture.
You'd be confronted by these colossal ziggurats, right? These massive terraced temple towers that seem to scrape the sky. And they're dedicated to powerful patron gods like Marduk and Ishtar. Marduk especially was the supreme god of Babylon.
Detect.
The top god. And the city itself pulsed with elaborate rituals. Not least this huge annual New Year festival, the Akutu Festival, where they publicly reenacted the Enuma Elish.
The Babylonian creation story.
Exactly. Babylon's epic creation story. And this myth described Marduk, the champion of the Babylonian gods, violently slaying this primordial chaos monster, Tiamat, and then forming the entire world, the sky, the earth, from her vast dismembered corpse.
Gruesome.
Yeah. So for the exiles, this wasn't just, cultural shock. It was an existential challenge to their faith, to their understanding of divine power, to everything they believed.
So their entire worldview, their sense of God's power, their own identity as Yahweh's people, it was all being systematically dismantled. Not just their physical nation destroyed, but their ideology, their beliefs were under assault.
Absolutely. The theological crisis facing Israel in exile was immense. It was multifaceted. You can just imagine the questions plaguing them. If Yahweh is truly supreme, if he's the God of all creation as we believed, then why did Babylon win? Why did Babylon, with its multitude of gods and its violent creation myth, win so decisively?
The biggest question.
Right. And if the temple in Jerusalem was God's dwelling place, what did its destruction mean? Where is God now? What about his power, his promises? How could they possibly worship without their sacred space, without their traditional rituals, the sacrifices, without the very land promised to their ancestors? Or Babylon's gods was Marduk, actually more powerful than Yahweh. That must have been the terrifying thought.
And the Babylonians wouldn't have let them forget it.
No way. The clear, undeniable message from their captors echoed in every towering ziggurat, every public festival, every piece of imperial propaganda was, Our gods, Marduk, above all, are supreme. They created the world. They gave Babylon dominion over the nations, and they proved their power by utterly defeating your God, Yahweh.
Wow, so Genesis 1 is the answer to that.
Genesis 1 was Israel's audacious, brilliant, and deeply subversive answer to all of that. It was a profound act of maintaining faith, maintaining identity, maintaining theological coherence in the face of this overwhelming imperial propaganda. It was, you could say, a declaration of independence written in exile. Not with swords, but with words, carefully crafted words designed to dismantle the very theological foundations of their oppressors' power.
Okay, before we can fully grasp just how revolutionary Genesis 1 really was in that original context, we probably need to step back for a second and understand the world it emerged from. Ancient Israelites, they weren't living in a vacuum, right? They shared many common assumptions about the cosmos, about how the universe worked with their neighbors. Can you sort of paint a picture of that ancient worldview for us? What did people generally believe about the structure of the universe and how it all came to be?
Certainly, yeah. It's really vital to recognize that the ancient Israelites lived within basically the same intellectual and cosmological universe as their neighbors in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, across the Levant.
Shared assumptions?
Exactly. Common ancient worldview elements included this widespread belief that the sky wasn't just empty space as we think of it. It was a solid dome, often called the firmament.
A hard shell.
Yeah, like a hard shell. And this dome was thought to hold back vast, chaotic waters up above it. So rain, logically, was understood as coming from, windows or gates that opened up in this firmament to let the water through.
Makes sense from observation.
It does. And below this dome, the Earth was generally conceived of as a flat disk, maybe surrounded by a cosmic ocean, or perhaps resting on massive pillars that were embedded way down in the deep, the primordial waters below.
Okay.
And crucially, chaos in this worldview was almost universally represented by these primordial waters, or sometimes by terrifying sea monsters. These embodied the unpredictable, the dangerous, the destructive forces of nature.
The opposite of order.
Precisely. So creation, therefore, typically involves some kind of divine action that brought order from this pre-existing chaos, establishing structure, boundaries, purpose. And humans, especially in those other surrounding cultures, often had specific roles in maintaining this cosmic order, usually by serving the gods through rituals, through labor, building temples, that kind of thing.
I've often heard scholars debate this idea of creation ex nihilo, that's creation out of nothing, versus ex materia, meaning creation from pre-existing material, like that chaos you mentioned. Where does Genesis 1 fit into that scholarly discussion, especially when we consider this ancient mindset?
That's a really important scholarly note to make, actually, because it directly impacts how we read Genesis 1, the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, creating out of nothing as we commonly understand it today. That wasn't explicitly articulated in Jewish thought until centuries later. You really see it clearly spelled out in a book called 2 Maccabees, which is from the 2nd century BCE. It talks about God making things out of things that did not exist.
Much
later. So many biblical scholars today argue that the ancient Israelites, much like their neighbors, likely conceived of creation primarily as the organizing and ordering of existing chaotic matter, rather than the literal manufacturing of matter from absolute nothingness.
Shaping, not making from scratch.
Kind of like that, yeah. The Genesis text itself, as we'll see when we get into it, begins with a world that is described as formless and empty, tohu wabohu in Hebrew, with darkness over the face of the deep. It's not presented as an absolute void, but rather as unformed, unfunctional chaos, just sort of waiting for God's ordering hand. This distinction is really crucial for understanding its revolutionary claims against, say, the Babylonian myths.
So a world where primordial waters were absolutely central to creation stories, much like in that Babylonian Enuma Elish you mentioned, with Apsu and Tiamat as the primordial parent.
Exactly. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that would have been so prominent, so unavoidable in the exile's new home in Babylon, described creation emerging from the mingling of Apsu, who personified fresh water, and Tiamat, who personified salt water.
The parents of the gods.
Right. And when these primordial deities gave birth to younger gods who were noisy and disturbed their rest, Tiamat, who initially was a kind of mother goddess, transforms into this terrifying chaos monster. She seeks to destroy her unruly offspring.
Standard family drama.
On a cosmic scale. The story culminates with the god Marduk stepping forward, becoming the champion of the younger gods. He slays Tiamat in this incredibly violent battle, splitting her body like a shellfish, the text says, to form the heavens and the earth from her corpse.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And similarly, if you look at Canaanite myths from Ugarit, You find the storm god Baal locked in fierce battle with Yam, the mighty sea god, to establish his dominion. Egyptian stories also involve gods emerging from primordial waters, often having to defeat chaotic forces to establish their rule. So Genesis 1 certainly works within this shared cosmic framework. It acknowledges the deep, Tiam, and the waters, but then it spectacularly subverts every single expectation about how divine power operates in creation, especially when compared to these violent imperial myths.
Okay, so how did it do this? Let's dive into the text, verse by verse. How did Genesis 1 achieve this subversion against the backdrop of Babylonian power?
All right, let's start right at the beginning. Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2.
The traditional English translation often implies that creation from absolute nothingness, in the beginning God created. But scholarly understandings of the original Hebrew suggest something subtly yet powerfully different about the true starting point, don't they?
Indeed. Yeah, while in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth is, familiar, powerful, iconic even, a more accurate scholarly understanding of the Hebrew, particularly that opening phrase, might be something closer to, when God began to create, God assigned order to the heavens and the earth.
When God began, that's different.
It is. And then verse 2 follows. Now the earth was formless and empty, with darkness over the face of the deep, and a wind spirit of God was hovering over the waters. This subtle shift, it changes our perception of the starting point. It's not an absolute void, but rather an already existing, though unorganized state.
Can you break down the specific Hebrew terminology for us? How do those original words contribute to that more nuanced understanding?
Yeah, let's unpack the key terms right there in those first two verses. The opening word, bereshit, which is often translated in the beginning, can grammatically function as what's called a construct phrase, meaning it could be read as when God began.
Okay.
This immediately shifts the focus away from an absolute ex nihilo beginning, creating from nothing, to the start of God's ordering activity. It implies that the raw material, described as formless and empty, the Hebrew is tohu wabohu, already existed in some state, just awaiting divine organization.
Like raw clay for a potter.
Sort of, yeah. Then there's the crucial verb, bara, often translated create. Now, while it can mean to create from nothing in some specific contexts, especially in later texts, more frequently in the Hebrew Bible, it implies assigning roles, assigning functions, or shaping order and purpose. It's less about literally manufacturing matter from nothing and more like, say, an artist creating a sculpture from existing clay, or maybe a king establishing order in a new city, giving it form, function, purpose.
Assigning order.
Exactly. And finally, Elohim, the word used for God here. Grammatically, it's a plural noun, literally gods. But it consistently takes a singular verb throughout Genesis 1. This presents God as one unified acting agent, while perhaps subtly acknowledging Israel's earlier henotheistic or polytheistic context, or maybe it even functions as a majestic plural of majesty, like a royal we, emphasizing the singular God's supreme power and authority.
Okay, so this opening, focusing on ordering chaos rather than, say, a violent primordial battle like in Babylon, how radical was that for an ancient Israelite, especially one sitting there in Babylonian exile hearing the Enuma Elish chanted during festivals?
It was profoundly radical, precisely because of those prevailing myths like the Enuma Elish. Unlike the Babylonian story, which begins with warring primordial waters, Apsu and Tiamat, and descends into violent divine conflict, Genesis opens with divine presence and a calm, deliberate, powerful act of ordering.
No war.
No war. And the Hebrew word keomem, which means the deep, and clearly refers to the primordial waters, it's linguistically related to the name of the Babylonian goddess Tiamat. But here's the crucial point of subversion. Genesis consciously strips Teon of any divine status whatsoever. It's not a fearsome goddess who needs to be slain. It's simply vast, unorganized water awaiting structure. Just water. Where the Enuma Elish required Marduk to violently kill Tiamat, spill her blood, split her body to form heaven and earth, Genesis simply states Elohim began to assign order. There's no cosmic battle, no clash of rival gods, just one sovereign deity at work, imposing order through sheer intention and word.
And that hovering spirit.
Right. And what's even more fascinating is the description of the spirit or wind of God. The Hebrew is Ruach Elohim, hovering, the verb is mereshephet, over these waters. This isn't a word associated with conflict or battle. The same Hebrew root is used later in Deuteronomy 32.11 to describe an eagle hovering protectively over its young in the nest.
Ah, so nurturing.
Exactly. The imagery suggests intimacy, care, a protective presence, not struggle or conquest, right there at the very inception of creation. It's a statement about divine sovereignty that is completely nonviolent, completely based on care and intention. A stark contrast to Marduk standing triumphantly over Tiamat's corpse.
Then God speaks, "Let there be light," and there was light. The power, the sheer effortlessness of creation just by speech alone is striking.
Absolutely. That power and effortlessness is foundational to the whole chapter. No battle needed, no raw materials explicitly mentioned, no cosmic violence, just a divine command, a spoken word, and reality instantly responds. But the truly revolutionary aspect, especially for a people living among Egyptians and Babylonians who revered sun gods.
Right, Ra and Shamash.
Exactly. The direct assault here is on solar deities. In Egypt, Ra, the sun god, was supreme, the source of all life and light. In Mesopotamia, Shamash, the sun god, controlled justice, law, divination. Throughout the ancient world, light itself was often considered divine, or at least a primary manifestation of God.
But Genesis.
Genesis deliberately, pointedly, creates light before the sun, moon, and stars. Those celestial bodies don't even appear until day 4.
Day 1, light. Day 4.
Exactly. Now, this wasn't scientific ignorance. Ancient people were incredibly keen observers of the heavens. They understood cycles. This was a potent act of theological warfare. It was designed to strip these cosmic bodies and the powerful deities associated with them of their divine status and their perceived power. Light is not a god. Light is a created thing, merely the first step in God's masterful bringing of order to the formless void.
And God separates light from darkness, naming them day and night. What does that act of naming signify? Especially for a people whose very identity was being questioned and challenged by their captors.
That act of naming is crucial. In the ancient world, naming something wasn't just about identification, like putting a label on a jar. It conferred authority, ownership, and control over whatever was named.
Like Adam naming the animals later.
Precisely. By naming these fundamental realities, calling the light day and the darkness night, God demonstrates complete, absolute control over time itself. He establishes order through boundaries, through separation. Notice, he doesn't destroy darkness, he separates it, assigns it a place, structures it within a rhythmic cycle.
Order through separation.
Yes, this establishes a fundamental pattern for the rest of creation in Genesis 1. Order emerges not through violent destruction of chaos, but through divine organization, separation, setting boundaries, and sovereign naming. Chaos doesn't have to be annihilated. It's separated, structured, contained, and made inhabitable through God's powerful word. It creates a predictable, divinely ordered world, not one born from conflict.
Okay, next up, day 2. God creates a dome, the rakia, to separate the water below from the water above, calling it sky, or heaven. Now, this aligns pretty well with those ancient cosmological views you mentioned, the idea of a solid firmament holding back waters above.
Yeah.
It seems to fit the prevailing scientific understanding of the time.
It absolutely does, and we need to appreciate that. Ancient peoples, looking up at the blue expanse of the sky, seeing rainfall, logically concluded there were vast waters up there, held back by something solid, an overarching dome. The rakia. The Hebrew word literally suggests something hammered out, like metal or a firm expanse.
Like a cosmic ceiling.
Exactly. This wasn't seen as primitive. It was sophisticated, observation-based reasoning for how their world appeared to work. Now, other cultures explain these heavenly waters and the dome holding them back by invoking divine conflict. Remember Marduk and Tiamat?
Right, he split her body.
Yeah. In the Enuma Elish, the dome of the sky was literally formed from the upper half of the slain chaos goddess Tiamat's corpse. In Egyptian cosmology, you have the sky goddess Nut arching over the earth, her body representing the firmament, with the celestial Nile, the heavenly waters flowing above her. So the presence of water above was a common ancient belief across the entire region.
But Genesis, again, presents a distinctly different narrative for how that dome came to be. It avoids the violence, the cosmic battle.
Indeed. Genesis's revolutionary twist here is that no battle, no gruesome dismemberment of a goddess, no slaying of a chaos monster is required at all. God simply speaks, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate water from water." And poof, the dome appears and separates the waters.
Just like that.
Just like that. The chaotic waters above. They aren't presented as divine entities with their own will. They are simply part of creation, organized and contained solely by God's word. This was an incredibly powerful message for Israel's exiles. Even the most chaotic and seemingly threatening forces in the cosmos, forces that other powerful nations personified as gods and feared intensely, are entirely under your God's control. Those waters that other nations worshipped, born from divine conflict, they're just water. Water that Elohim has organized and contained with a simple spoken command. There is no rival power to Yahweh. Everything is subject to his effortless will.
Then on day 3, Let the waters under the sky be gathered into one place so that dry ground may appear. Now, for ancient peoples, especially those living near coastlines or rivers, the sea was often utterly terrifying. It represented overwhelming chaos, danger. Seems like a natural target for demonstrating divine control.
Absolutely. The uncontrolled sea, the deep, it was an immense source of fear and awe in the ancient world. Think about floods, tsunamis, violent storms that could bring death, wipe out communities, erase entire landscapes.
Total destruction.
Exactly. So, many ancient cultures worshipped powerful sea gods precisely out of this deep-seated fear and respect for the sea's destructive, unpredictable potential. We mentioned the Canaanite myths depicting Baal locked in this fierce, epic battle with Yam, the powerful sea god, just to establish order and secure his throne.
Right, Baal versus Yam.
And the Mesopotamian stories, celebrating Marduk's victory over Tiamat, the primal goddess of the salt water, seeing that as the absolute prerequisite for dry land to even appear, for human civilization to flourish. The sea really was the epitome of untamed, destructive chaos in their minds.
And Genesis again offers this dramatically peaceful alternative, no big fight with a sea god.
Precisely. In Genesis, God just speaks again. Let the waters under the sky be gathered into one place so that dry ground may appear, and the waters obey. Instantly, there's no battle, no bloodshed, no cosmic struggle against some rival sea deity named Yam or Tiamat. The sea isn't a god to be fought. It's simply water to be organized and contained.
Boundaries again.
Boundaries again. By setting limits, like other biblical texts echo, you may come this far and no farther. God demonstrates that even the most chaotic and fearsome forces in creation have limits. They're subject to his sovereign will. And critically, what happens next on day 3? Vegetation appears. Plants, trees, fruit.
Right, before the sun on day 4.
Exactly. That sequencing was deeply intentional and hugely significant, especially for people living in exile among sun worshippers. It further stripped the sun, and by extension any solar deity like Ra or Shamash, of any divine status as the ultimate source of life or agricultural blessing. It emphatically showed that life, growth, agricultural bounty came directly from Elohim, not from solar deities, not from fertility gods like Baal.
God provides directly.
Yes. And that recurring phrase, according to its kind, that you see throughout day 3 and later, it emphasizes the structured, ordered, stable nature of God's creation. It asserts his deliberate and orderly rule over every aspect of existence, including the cycles of agriculture that were so vital for survival.
Okay, moving on to day 4. God creates lights in the sky. But what's truly fascinating here, as you hinted, is what the text pointedly doesn't do, especially in terms of naming those big celestial bodies. It feels almost dismissive.
That's a crucial observation, yeah. It highlights a key element of Genesis's resistance theology. The writer deliberately, consciously, avoids naming the sun, moon, or stars using their common Hebrew names.
Intrower.
In Hebrew, Shemesh was the everyday word for sun, and Yarich was the word for moon. But crucially, those were also the names of pagan deities that were widely worshipped across the ancient Near East, particularly in Mesopotamia and Egypt, where the Israelites were exiled or had connections.
So naming them would be acknowledging the gods.
It could certainly imply that, or at least give them undue prominence. So instead, what do we get? These careful circumlocutions. The greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And then, almost casually, he made the stars also. It's almost dismissed as an afterthought, implying their relative insignificance compared to the creator who made them.
So this wasn't just like a careful linguistic choice. It was a very deliberate theological demotion, stripping these celestial bodies and the powerful gods associated with them of their perceived divinity, their power over human destiny.
It was a direct and powerful assault on astral worship. And astral worship was absolutely widespread, deeply ingrained throughout the ancient world, especially in Babylon, where the exiles were living. Remember, in Egypt, Ra, the sun god, was supreme. Thoth governed the moon and time. In Mesopotamia, Shamash, the sun god, controlled justice and divination. Sin was the powerful moon god associated with wisdom and prophecy. Stars were often seen as lesser deities or, crucially, as controlling human destiny through astrology, which was huge in Babylon.
Right.
Genesis's revolutionary demotion is crystal clear. These cosmic bodies, they aren't gods, they're not divine, they hold absolutely no independent power over human fate. They are merely lamps. That's essentially how they're presented. Lamps hung in the dome of the sky.
Just functional objects.
Exactly. Their purpose, as the text explicitly states, is purely functional. To separate the day from the night and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. They exist to serve human needs by marking time and seasons, not to control human destiny, not to receive worship. Imagine how liberating this message was for Israelites in exile, living among a people who intensely practiced astral worship and astrology. The very cosmic forces their powerful captors revered, consulted, worshipped as gods. They were nothing more than lights. Their God, Yahweh, hung up for practical purposes, just tools in his cosmic temple. Their power was entirely derived, not inherent.
Okay, at day 5. Then God says, let the water swarm with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. And then it mentions the great sea creatures. That Hebrew word, tanamim, it sounds significant, more than just whales or large fish, as some translations might put it.
Oh, it is indeed. Yeah, while often translated as great sea creatures or even whales in modern translations, maybe to make it sound less mythological or alarming, the Hebrew word tananim in ancient Near Eastern literature refers to much more than just large aquatic animals. It typically signifies powerful, fearsome sea monsters, dragons, creatures that embody cosmic chaos and profound threat.
Like Leviathan.
Exactly like Leviathan or the Canaanite Lotan. Yeah. Think back to the Babylonian Tiamat, who was explicitly depicted as a chaos serpent or dragon that Marduk had to violently slay and dismember to bring about creation. Or the Egyptian Apophis, or Apep, the immense serpent of chaos, the eternal enemy of the sun god Ra, always threatening to swallow the sun and plunge the world back into darkness. These weren't just big fish. These were terrifying cosmic forces that embodied the ultimate threat to order and creation, requiring heroic divine intervention to be subdued in those other myths.
And Genesis just casually states, so God created the great sea creatures, Tananum, and every living thing with which the water teems. No battle, no blood, no epic cosmic struggle against these monstrous forces. It's almost mundane.
Precisely. And that's another incredibly bold, audacious theological statement. It's a direct and devastating blow to all that chaos mythology. There's no battle, no blood spilled, no cosmic struggle needed to subdue these monsters. The fearsome creatures that terrified other nations, that were personified as powerful deities embodying chaos in other cultures, are treated by Genesis as simply another group of animals God made.
Just part of the zoo?
Pretty much. They are just creatures swimming around under God's authority, created by his word, just like the little fish and the birds. This was a direct and powerful assault on the very idea of rival cosmic powers. What other cultures feared or even worshipped as ultimate cosmic threats, Genesis reduces to mere components of creation, entirely subject to Elohim's will.
And they get blessed too.
And here's what's truly remarkable, yes. Even these chaos monsters, the Tananim, received the first divine blessing alongside the birds. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. This completely inverts the normal relationship presented in other myths between order and chaos. Instead of being destroyed or perpetually fought, they are blessed, told to thrive, integrated as part of God's good, ordered creation. They are tamed, blessed, and made part of the system, not enemies outside it.
Okay, now day 6. We come to the creation of land animals, and then the pinnacle, humanity. Then God said, let us make humanity in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule. And it goes on. So God created humanity in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over everything. That language rule, subdue, it really sounds like kingship, like a royal mandate being given.
It absolutely is. You're spot on. The Hebrew words used there, radah, which means to rule, to reign, sometimes even to dominate, and kabosh, which means to subdue, to tread down, to bring into subjugation. These are explicitly terms of kingship and royal authority in the ancient world.
So God's making everyone royalty.
In a sense, yes. Genesis is, in fact, giving all humanity, male and female, equally, the royal status and the royal mandate that other ancient cultures reserved exclusively for their kings and pharaohs alone.
Wow.
And that phrase, in our image, using the plural us, whether you understand that as God addressing a heavenly council of divine beings, or perhaps just using a majestic royal we that emphasizes God's own sovereign authority, it clearly signifies a unique, elevated status for human beings.
Well,
We are created to be God's representatives on earth, reflecting his wise, benevolent, and ordering rule of the rest of creation. This is where the profound anti-imperial and, yes, proto-egalitarian elements of Genesis truly blossom and become undeniable.
so this isn't just about individual self-worth, though it includes that. It's a profound challenge to the very DNA of imperial power structures, isn't it? Those systems relied on keeping most people down, subservient, devalued, while reserving divine connection and authority only for the ruling elite. This sounds exactly like that proto-democratic, maybe even touching on that socialist impulse you cautioned about earlier, but making its clearest statement here. It feels like a revolutionary democratization of power and dignity.
It is indeed a radical statement of equality and intrinsic worth, and it absolutely challenges the very foundations of ancient hierarchy. You're perceptive to connect it back to those initial observations about challenging power. In Mesopotamian and Egyptian thought, remember, only the king or the pharaoh was considered the image of God or the son of God, imbued with divine essence and special authority. Pharaoh, for instance, was seen as a divine intermediary, almost the living embodiment of the god Horus.
And everyone else.
Ordinary people. They existed primarily to serve the gods, and by extension to serve the king who represented the gods. They were often seen as expendable, essentially just laborers in the cosmic machinery, having little inherent worth beyond their utility to the state or the temple.
Oh.
Genesis, in stark dramatic contrast, makes this truly revolutionary declaration. Every single human being, male and female equally, is made in the image of God.
Yeah.
All humans, not just a select royal elite, are given this inherent royal dignity, this intrinsic worth, and this shared responsibility to co-rule with God over creation.
That's huge.
It's huge. And what's fascinating here is that this was effectively social revolution encoded in theology. Think about it. For people living in exile, facing imperial powers that had utterly demeaned them, enslaved them, depersonalized them, this message was profound. It told these exiles, these slaves, that they carried a divine dignity and intrinsic worth that no empire, no oppressor, no worldly power could possibly strip away. It's basically a theological foundation for universal human rights, centuries before that concept formally existed.
And connecting back to that socialist idea.
Right. And to address your earlier observation directly, while we absolutely must be cautious applying modern political labels like socialist anachronistically, this text is undeniably anti-imperial and egalitarian in its implications. It doesn't propose a specific economic system like modern socialism does, of course not, but it lays a powerful theological groundwork that fundamentally undermines the legitimacy of any system, ancient or modern, that exploits, devalues, and dehumanizes human life for the sake of power or profit. It says every person matters equally because they reflect God.
Okay. And there's also this detail about food in the original vision. Both humans and animals are given plants, implying a world without violence initially.
Yes, that's correct. Right at the end of day 6, God declares, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And it says, and to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it. I give every green plant for food.
So universal vegetarianism.
Essentially, yes, in the initial perfect state. It implies a harmonious, nonviolent existence in the original creation. No bloodshed is envisioned, violence, predation, the eating of meat by humans. These are introduced into the biblical story only later, specifically after the flood narrative in Genesis chapter 9. That marks a kind of concession to a fallen world, a shift from this pristine original order. The original intention seems to have been one of peaceful provision and sustenance from the plant kingdom for all living creatures.
And after these 6 days, God looks at everything and declares it.
He declares everything very good. The Hebrew is tov me'anshed. This phrase suggests not just moral goodness, but also functional perfection. Everything works exactly as intended, in harmony, in order, perfectly fulfilling its created purpose, reflecting God's wise and benevolent design. The whole system is good, complete, and functioning beautifully.
So after 6 days of this intense, deliberate ordering creation, God rests on the 7th day. Now, many people might just interpret rest as, taking a break because he was tired, like anyone would be after all that work.
Right, haha.
But the Hebrew word Shabbat, it seems to have a much deeper, more profound meaning here, doesn't it? It feels like it's signifying something more than just a divine nap.
Indeed. Yeah, the meaning of Shabbat here is far richer, far more significant than just recovering from physical exhaustion.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean God got tired after 6 days of creative work and needed a breather.
Okay.
Rather, it primarily means he ceased his specific work of creation. He settled. And crucially, in the context of ancient Near Eastern temple building and cosmology, it signifies that he took up residence.
Took up residence, like moving in.
Exactly. In ancient Near Eastern thinking, when a god rested after a major act of creation or conquest, like when Marduk finally settled into his newly built temple, Esagila, after defeating Tiamat and establishing world order, it signified that the god had completed his work and had taken up his rightful rule in his temple. It's an act of enthronement. It's a declaration of sovereignty. It's the moment of taking up authority over the now completed domain, not just taking a break. God is moving into his cosmic temple, the creation itself, to reign.
Wow. Can you break down those key Hebrew terms from Genesis 2.1 to 3 a bit more for us to really get at the significance of this divine rest?
Sure. Let's look at the language there. First, Genesis 2.1 says the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their sava. That word sava is often translated as host or even army. Here it refers to the fully ordered array, the entire structured cosmos of everything in creation, the sun, moon, stars, creatures, everything functioning together. It's the fully deployed, organized universe now complete.
A whole ordered system.
Exactly. Then comes Shabbat itself in verse 2, the root for our word Sabbath. As we've discussed, it means to cease, to desist from work, but carries a strong connotation of completion and taking up residence, settling into authority. Then in verse 3, God Barak, he blessed the seventh day. This is actually the first time in Genesis 1 and 2 that something is blessed purely for its own sake, not just blessed to be fruitful and multiply. God specifically blesses this day. And finally, he made holy or set apart the seventh day. This is incredibly significant. The very first time anything in the entire scripture is called holy, kadoshet. And notice what is made holy. It's time. A specific segment of time is sanctified, not a physical place like a mountain or a building, not an object. This is a crucial distinction.
So God is effectively moving into his new cosmic home, the perfected creation, and beginning his reign from within it. And the Sabbath, this holy time, then becomes a fundamental part of that cosmic order he established.
Precisely. Genesis 2.1-3 is fundamentally about God taking up residence in the cosmic temple of his perfectly ordered creation and reigning from within it. And this, again, is a revolutionary reversal of common ancient Near Eastern creation narratives. Remember those Babylonian myths?
Yeah, humans made to work so the gods could rest.
Exactly. They often claimed that humans were created precisely so that the gods could rest, while people had to work endlessly, toiling constantly to feed them, serve them, build their temples, maintain their cities. Genesis flips this entire concept on its head. God himself rests, having completed his work, and then profoundly, humans are invited to participate in that divine rest.
Wow, an invitation into God's rest.
Yes, and this rest, the Sabbath, becomes the first thing in Scripture to be explicitly called holy. And it's time that is made holy. This created a recurring sanctuary, accessible every seventh day. It meant that access to God's presence, participating in his reign, wasn't solely confined to a specific geographical temple built of stone, which, ironically, the exiles had just lost. God's holy presence was now accessible through a pattern of time, available anywhere.
That makes the Sabbath far more than just, a day off work, especially for a people in exile, oppressed, forced into labor by a powerful empire like Babylon. It sounds like observing the Sabbath could be seen as a profound act of resistance in itself.
Absolutely. You've hit on a key implication. For Israel in exile, or indeed for any people living under the yoke of an oppressive empire, observing the Sabbath was a profound, even politically subversive act of resistance.
So.
Well, think about it. Empires, ancient and modern, demand endless labor. They force people to build their monumental structures, their pyramids, their ziggurats, their taluses for Pharaoh or Nebuchadnezzar. They force people to farm for the imperial granaries, to fight their wars, often working them to exhaustion, treating them as mere resources.
Expendable cogs.
Exactly. The Sabbath, however, fundamentally said, stop, cease. You are not slaves defined solely by your productivity. Your value isn't derived from your output or your utility to an empire. Your inherent dignity comes from being God's image bearer, from being part of his good creation, not from what you produce for worldly powers.
A declaration of freedom every week.
Yes. For Israelites, who had just lost their physical temple in 586 BCE, this message was incredibly powerful. Even without those stone walls in Jerusalem, the entire cosmos was God's temple. And every seventh day, no matter where they were, even in Babylon, they could enter his presence, participate in his rest, imitate their creator, and thereby reclaim their dignity and their freedom. It was a weekly act of rebellion against the empire's relentless demands. It reminded them of a higher allegiance and a truer identity. It was, in its own way, a refusal to fully participate in the empire's economy of exploitation and dehumanization.
It's clear then, as we pull these threads together, that Genesis 1 is just saturated with these egalitarian implications that directly challenge those ancient imperial hierarchies. You've noted before that early Awism contained these proto-democratic egalitarian elements. Can we explicitly connect all these revolutionary threads, now the image of God, the Sabbath, the demotion of other gods, to this broader social and political dimension of resistance?
We absolutely can. You're very perceptive in noting those deep egalitarian implications woven throughout the entire narrative. Genesis 1 laid crucial theological groundwork for ideas of universal human worth and social justice that were profoundly revolutionary for its time. It directly challenged the rigid hierarchical structures that defined ancient imperial societies.
So what were these specific egalitarian and anti-imperial elements again? Let's list them out. What made Genesis 1 such a potent piece of resistance literature for those exiles?
Okay, we can definitely point to several key aspects that culminate in this revolutionary vision. First, and maybe most foundational, is the universal human dignity inherent in the image of God. As we discussed, this isn't reserved for the king. It's applied to all people, male and female, implicitly regardless of social status, nationality, or wealth. This instantly levels the playing field theologically, conferring an intrinsic, non-negotiable worth on every single individual that no earthly power, no empire can diminish or legitimately take away.
Everyone reflects God.
Exactly. Second, there's the shared royal status. All humans, male and female equally, are given dominion, told to rule and subdue, using those terms of kingship, radah, and kabosh. This effectively democratizes kingship. It decentralizes the power and responsibility that other cultures concentrated solely in a single monarch or a tiny elite. Every person is, in essence, appointed as a co-regent with God, entrusted with the responsible care and ordering of his creation.
Power distributed.
Power distributed, responsibility shared. Third, the Sabbath itself, as we just discussed, functions as a profound act of labor resistance. These mandatory regular rest cycles directly challenge the relentless, endless work demands of imperial systems, which sought to extract maximum labor from their subjects to build monuments or fill granaries or fight wars. The Sabbath declared that humans were not mere machines, that their ultimate allegiance was not to the empire's productivity goals, and that their rest and inherent dignity were divinely ordained.
A built-in limit to exploitation.
A built-in limit. And finally, the entire text functions as an anti-imperial theology. All those cosmic forces that empires like Egypt and Babylon worshipped as powerful gods, the sun, the moon, the stars, the primordial sea monsters, were systematically demoted, reduced to mere tools, lamps, or aspects of creation under Yahweh's soul and absolute effortless control. This implicitly stripped imperial rulers, who often claimed divine sanction for their power and closely associated themselves with these deified forces, of their ultimate theological legitimacy. It did this by diminishing the very gods they served and challenging the cosmic order they claimed to embody and uphold.
So going back to that earlier thought, while applying a modern political label like socialist to an ancient religious text is definitely tricky and probably inaccurate,
Anachronistic.
the anti-imperial and egalitarian aspects are undeniably there. They're deeply woven into the theological fabric. Genesis 1 presents this vision of justice and universal dignity that radically subverts the dominant power structures of its day.
Precisely. We absolutely need to be cautious with applying modern political labels like socialist directly. These are ancient religious concepts operating within a specific theocratic worldview, not modern secular political ideologies. Genesis 1 isn't advocating for, say, state ownership of the means of production.
Right.
But it does strongly articulate resistance to imperial exploitation, dehumanization, and hierarchical oppression. It does so powerfully within its specific theological framework. So it's much more accurate and academically responsible to describe these elements as anti-imperial or egalitarian. Now, it's true that later developments in Israelite law, things like the Jubilee laws mandating land redistribution and debt cancellation, certainly included radical economic justice elements that modern readers might see as progressive, perhaps even proto-socialist, in their aim to prevent extreme wealth disparity and alleviate poverty. But the core message embedded right here in Genesis 1 was this fundamental theological challenge to the divine right of kings and the oppressive structures of empires that claim divine mandate for their brutal rule. It's a profound indictment of any system, ancient or modern, that devalues human life for the sake of power or profit.
So the political dimension of insisting on exclusive Yahweh worship in that context was profoundly real. It wasn't just a religious preference. It was immediately felt as a challenge by those in power, and it seems intentionally crafted into this creation narrative.
It was indeed. Exclusive Yahweh worship, understood in its original context, was inherently a politically subversive act. It directly challenged the religious political systems that legitimized imperial power throughout the ancient Near East.
How so?
By reducing the powerful gods of other nations, the very gods the emperors claimed descent from or patronage of, to mere creatures or phenomena under Yahweh's solitary control, and simultaneously elevating every single human being to the status of a divine image-bearer possessing royal dignity, it made Yahwism a fundamentally subversive ideology. It undermined the claims of empires that based their authority on divine mandate and often demanded worship of their own gods as a sign of political loyalty. Your instinct about the social justice implications is historically sound. We just need to carefully frame it as ancient resistance to imperial oppression, rather than modern socialism, understanding the historical and theological nuances. It's ultimately about a declaration of universal human worth that transcends earthly power structures, offering dignity and hope, and maybe even a blueprint for a more just society, even when surrounded by overwhelming, seemingly invincible power.
It's crucial to remember, though, as we sort of wrap up this incredibly detailed analysis, that we're engaging here in scholarly, historical, critical interpretation. We're trying to understand what the text likely meant to its original audience in its specific historical context, rather than approaching it solely as, say, a devotional reading or a scientific account.
Absolutely, that's a vital distinction.
Yeah.
We're discussing academic analysis, drawing on historical context, linguistic study, comparative mythology, archaeology. And it's crucial to present, for example, some of the interpretations we've leaned on, like John Walton's influential functional interpretation of Genesis 1,
Right.
the idea of creation as primarily about assigning order and function rather than solely material manufacturing, as one significant scholarly view, but not necessarily a universal consensus across all of biblical scholarship.
Right. They're ongoing debates.
Always. There are always ongoing, vibrant debates among scholars. We must also acknowledge the continuing discussions about, for instance, the precise historical development of that creation ex nihilo doctrine when exactly it became mainstream. And also the ongoing debates about the exact extent and nature of ancient Israelite polytheism or henotheism before the Babylonian exile finally solidified monotheism. This kind of nuanced approach, acknowledging complexity and scholarly inquiry, helps us understand the text in its fullest historical and intellectual context, rather than oversimplifying or presenting just one single unchallenged interpretation as the only way to read it. So, as we conclude this deep dive, I think it's abundantly clear that Genesis 1 wasn't written as, a scientific textbook trying to explain the precise geological or astronomical mechanisms of how the universe physically came into being.
No, definitely not science.
No. It was a profound theological manifesto,
Yeah.
forged in the fires of exile. It was a direct, calculated, brilliant response to the imperial myths, the state propaganda, and the overwhelming power of Babylon that surrounded the shattered, traumatized people of Israel. Every choice of word, every structural element, every sequence seems designed to systematically dismantle the theological claims of their oppressors, and at the same time, powerfully reaffirm the unique sovereignty of their God, Yahweh, and the intrinsic God-given worth of his people.
Where Babylon said creation required divine violence, cosmic bloodshed, human servitude to feed lazy gods, Genesis responded that God creates through peaceful, powerful speech and deliberate ordering, and then invites humanity into his own celebratory rest. Where chaos was personified as a fearsome goddess needing conquest, Genesis declared it was just unorganized matter, totally under God's effortless control from the start. And while Babylon and Egypt declared humans existed simply to serve the gods and the state, and that only kings bore the divine image, Genesis dropped that bombshell. All humans, male and female, implicitly slave and free, exiled and at home, are God's image bearers, carrying inherent royal dignity and divine responsibility.
Yeah.
The tragic irony, of course, which you see throughout history, is how often this inherently liberating narrative, this blueprint for universal dignity and justice, has been twisted. It's been weaponized to justify the very systems of oppression it was originally written to challenge, using the text to support slavery, or to justify the concentration of power, or to demand endless, dehumanizing labor from the masses, completely missing the point.
That is the great tragedy. But understanding its original context, I think, allows us to reclaim its truly liberating message. Every single human being carries an irreducible dignity, rooted in their very creation by God, that no earthly power, no empire, no system can legitimately strip away. The God who brought order from chaos and elevated the downtrodden in this story continues, according to this worldview, to work for justice and restoration in a world still deeply marked by oppression, inequality, and the dehumanizing demands of powerful systems. This ancient text, read in context, offers a timeless challenge to those systems.
So what stands out most to you as we finish this deep dive? For me, it's realizing the creation story isn't just some quaint tale about how the world began physically. It's this foundational declaration of how God's justice, his ordering power, can bring order to societal chaos, dignity to the oppressed, and hope to those who feel utterly powerless. That message feels as profoundly revolutionary today, challenging us to recognize the divine image in everyone we meet and to actively resist systems that seek to diminish or erase it, as it must have been for those exiles sitting by the rivers of ancient Babylon.